Hi, thank you, Carter, for inviting me to talk to share how Geolytix support Mitchells and Butlers in building an integrated network plan to put the right brands in the right location. So, a little about us. We are a location planning consultancy. We're just coming up to our 10-year anniversary this year, and our main focus is to help our customers optimize their existing physical estates and online channels, and to understand their customers and catchments. We're Smallbook Global, so there's 35 of us in London, Leeds, Warsaw, Johannesburg, Shanghai, Tokyo, Melbourne. I've probably forgotten somewhere. And we were thrilled this month to receive the Queen's Award for Enterprise for International Trade. I think at last count, we've done projects in just over 50 countries. So we love the challenge of a new country. As well as location analytics, we also build geodata products and software, and often with our customers, we'll take their customer data to build a bespoke solution for them. So that could be a dynamic network plan that updates when a dark store is opened, or it could be some software for the field team so that they can collect information about their competitors, or they can run a sales forecast in the field when they're at a new site. We work with some amazing customers and some amazing brands, and there's just a few of them there. So on to the case study. So why did I choose Mitchells and Butlers to talk about today? I just want to thank them firstly for letting me share some of our journey together. And who doesn't want to talk about going to the pub, especially after the year we've had? So that's one reason why, but also they offer a brilliant opportunity for really different analysis because of the number of sites and the number of brands. So they have over 1,700 pubs and restaurants, and typically before lockdown they would convert or remodel over 240 a year. So the conversions are when they take a pub or restaurant from being one brand and turn it into another brand, and the remodels are when they refurbish, and they also open new pubs and restaurants. So there's lots going on. So these are their 15 brands, and they've got a few other ones as well in addition to those, but we have dining brands, Miller and Carter, Toby, Harvester, and then we have the bars, so O'Neill's and Old Bar One, and then the more pub brands like the Ember Inns and Premium Country Pubs. And they really differ obviously between the dry and the wet led sales, so the food and the drink. And we spent quite a bit of time when we first started working with Mitchells and Butler in 2018, just understanding how dry and wet sales differed and how location types differed across the brands. So first step of any project is to look at the data. So we're very lucky to have the customer data warehouse. So we have millions of transactions from customers, so we know who shops at the different brands and we know where they come from. And we also supplemented this with lots of other data. So we have all the Mitchells and Butlers locations, we have all the competition data from the CGA, and we also have our own F&B hubs. So these are around 400 polygons across the cities, larger towns and tourist towns, and it's areas which people will think, oh, I'm going there to eat. So it's real eating and drinking destinations, and we found that this had a really strong correlation with the sales performance. We decided to automate the location type because of the number of locations, and also because we wanted to look at the network plan and look at lots of new potential locations. It was easier to automate it. So we had 7 different tests that we ran through, and at the end of all these tests, each site or existing site was put into one of the location types that you can see on the screen. And the tests were things like, how far away is it from the major road network? What's the density of the population? What's the density of the workers? We also used TripAdvisor and mobility data. So the TripAdvisor data was really useful for when we were looking at remodels. And this is because we don't have the TripAdvisor when we're opening a new site. So we couldn't use it for those, but for remodels it was really valuable. And it was interesting that it wasn't just the average rating that was important, but it was looking at the proportion of excellent ratings and the proportion of below average ratings, and that had a much stronger correlation than looking at the average. And then the mobility data we got from Unicast, and one of the great uses for this was quantifying seasonality. So it was really easy to look at different pubs in different towns and go, oh, that's a tourist town, or that's Leicester Square, that's touristy. But it's harder to say, okay, how many more tourists are there in Brighton than somewhere else, and what does that mean in terms of actual sales for the pubs and restaurants? So the Unicast data really let us build a seasonality index that we were happy with, and also we spent a lot of time thinking about how can we use the activity data to represent the footfall, but not to mistakenly take the destination of the pub itself into account. So when we're looking at a new site that doesn't have a pub, it's obviously not got that draw for the footfall. And when you're looking at existing sites, you've got the pub there, so you've already got that footfall. So we tried looking at donuts around the site to mitigate that. And also in high footfall areas, there's lots of other stuff going on, so it's not just the pub that's creating that footfall. So I think the important bit there is that you can't just take the data. You have to think about how you're using it and what you're doing with it. And once we'd got all our database set up and all the data, we started to look at the customer profiling, and we were really keen to just create one score for each brand, so that when we were looking at any location in the country, we could give it a score for each brand, and you could really easily see, oh, this is the best brand that's aligned to the catchment. So we came up with the MAD propensity score, just a weighted geodemographic score for the catchment, and it represents the likelihood for those customers to visit the brand. So you can see for this example, for a site in Fleet, brand A is the best aligned, but brand B is very close to that, and it's actually brand B that was selected in that instance, because when you looked at the sales and the profit viability, that was the best one. Distance, this was really key for Mitchells and Butlers. So you can see in the chart on the right that every line represents one of the different brands, and you can see how different they are. So when you're looking at the proportion of transactions as the drive time from the pub or restaurant increases, we see some really different things going on. For the large dining destination brands, you'll get a really big catchment, and for more of the local pubs, you'll have a very small catchment. So if you were looking at a 20-minute catchment, for some of the brands, you'd have more than the whole catchment in there, and for others, you'd only have a third. So it definitely wasn't one size fits all, and we really needed to understand how transactions decayed and include that in the modelling. And we took the MAD propensity and the distance together, and we came up with an effective population. So a population that took into account how far away that person was away from the pub and restaurant, and how aligned they were with the brand. So then Dan and Christoph had the lovely task of going off and deciding what model to build, which would best forecast the sales for all the different brands. And we came up with a number of models that were split by brand and location type. This increased accuracy. And we used a non-negative least squared regression, but we automated it so that we could put all the variables in, and then we could also use interactive variables, so we could match every variable with every other possible variable, and check all thousands and thousands of variables to pick the best selection. And we'd obviously always do a manual review to check that selection made sense. We split the drivers between primary drivers and secondary drivers, and the primary drivers were those that related to people, so population, workers, and the secondary drivers were those that related to the attractiveness, so the probability of people visiting the pub and restaurant. The interactive variables were much more powerful. So if you think of if we'd had the number of covers or the number of seats in a restaurant as a primary driver on its own, if you opened a 200-seat restaurant in the middle of nowhere, you would still get a high sales forecast. Whereas if we have an interactive variable where we link population with the number of covers, you don't get that happening, and that's much better. So we've got an example here of one of the models. And we share with the Mitchells and Butlers team all the drivers that are behind each model so that they know what's important when they're looking at the sales forecast. So for this particular model, the primary drivers we had were effective population, the town population, and the number of workers. And you can see that the effective population there is really important. And the secondary drivers that are interacting with that population are the number of covers, the internal EDA, which is the size of the restaurant, and then the bar and the restaurant competition. So we're able to forecast the sales for all the existing pubs and restaurants, and then we can compare the forecast to the actual. And our location planners spend a long time looking at the over and underperformers and the model variance. And we do this with the guys at Mitchells and Butlers. So you're fantastic, thank you. And we make sure that the ones which are overperforming the model, there's something about the micro pitch or the unique style of building that we've not been able to capture in the data. This is something that means that we would want the pub or restaurant to overperform, and we want the opposite to be true for the ones at the other end of the scale. What we also do is correlate the model variance with an internal operational score that Mitchells and Butlers have. And we found that there's a really strong correlation between how well the pub and restaurant is run and the model variance. So that, again, is really good and gives us a lot of confidence in the outputs. So we have our model logic, and we then have the capability to run any brand in any location. So if this Miller and Carter were a harvester, if this Turby was a premium country pub, what do we think the sales would be? So we use this capability to start to think about our integrated network plan. And if we had a blank sheet of paper and we could start to go, what would the network look like? We want to put some business assumptions in there. We want to put in sales thresholds because we know that certain brands have to reach certain sales thresholds to be financially viable. And we also want to put in some location type rules. So we know that some brands only work in certain location types and not others. So we put all those in to begin with. And then we buffer out the potential conversions. So if we've got a Miller and Carter restaurant, we won't allow another Miller and Carter restaurant to open within its catchment if the cannibalisation is going to be too high. So we follow the 5-step process. So we do the buffering in number 1, and then the second step is to select the best candidates. So we highlight the conversions with the highest increase in sales. But we make sure that those thresholds I mentioned are met, and also that there's a high enough MAB propensity score. And then we iterate through the estate. So we choose the very best conversion. We go, okay, which is the number 1 site that would benefit most from changing from brand X to brand Y? Let's do that. Okay, let's open that, then buffer that out, and then we'll go and look for the next one. And we go through the whole estate doing that and opening all the conversions until there's no more that can be done. And then we think, okay, where can we put new sites and locations? So where can we add in the new acquisitions for the different brands, and we put those in. And then the final step is to calculate all the cannibalisation across all the different actions from what we've done. So it's quite confusing. So we'll take it through a worked example. So in this example, we've got Turby Shenston in the north, and we're recommending that converting this to a Miller and Carter, you would achieve a good sales uplift. So we convert the Turby to the Miller and Carter, and then what that means is that some of the customers that used to go to that Turby still want to dine at a Turby, so they will go to those Turbys that you can see to the south. So Turby Streetley actually receives a sales uplift from Turby Shenston converting to a Miller and Carter. But at the same time, we've recommended that the sizzling hare and hounds in the southeast there converts to a Toby. So Toby Streetleys experiences a sales impact from that, because some of the people where it's more convenient to go to the hare and hounds will now do that. Overall, Toby Streetley is net positive, so the uplift it receives from the Miller and Carter conversion is more than the impact it receives from the hare and hounds conversion. And then we do have a negative impact in this scenario with the Miller and Carter at Sutton Park. So that Miller and Carter actually has a small negative uplift. So you can imagine that we're doing all these hundreds of different actions, and then we can deliver a list to Mitchells and Butlers with, these are all the conversions that we think we should do, and these are all the sales uplifts and the sales impacts from doing those conversions, and then they can decide what they want to do, and they've got, you know, very transparent way of deciding, oh yes, I would like to do that conversion and this is going to be the impact. It was great to go through the final recommendations with the team, because whilst there was a lot of the obvious candidates on the list for ones that they were already looking at or ones that they'd already thought about, there was quite a number of recommendations on there that they hadn't thought about that they could then go away and review. So it was a very valuable and worthwhile exercise to do. So that brings me to the end of the integrated network plan, but I thought just worth talking for 2 minutes on life post lockdown, because we did this work before the world stopped, and we've now, obviously the world's opening up again, and we've got to think about what that means, and we're in regular communication with Mitchells and Butlers, and we're thinking about you know, what new data we can look at, what real-time analysis that we can do, and what existing data that we've got, which is now more important than it used to be. So if I just quickly show outdoor seating. So outdoor seating is one that was always in the models before, but now it's so much more important, obviously, especially in this month, but I think ongoing it will be more important as well. So it's just making sure that it's in their software so they can filter. So if we can see how many pubs have got more than 30 outdoor seats, or how many have got more than 100 outdoor seats, and it's just having that data, having that data to hand, but also having it in an analog model as well. So we build the spatial forecasting models, but alongside we've also built them a benchmark or an analog model. So for any new site or an existing site, they can see the 5 most like pubs or restaurants. And it's very important to now put new variables into this. So we didn't have outdoor seating into it before, and we'll put that in so that we can see, you know, how is that affecting sales performance, and is it all pubs with larger outdoor areas that are performing well, or is there something else going on in addition to that? And obviously the mobility data as well really plays a part as the world's recovering, and understanding what's happening to the worker population and commuting, and there's thousands of questions that we're running through, and it generally comes down to either forecasting scenarios or thinking, okay, we'll wait until we have X number of weeks, and we'll look at the analysis, and we will make a call. So thank you very much. That's our email address there. Please get in touch if I can help anyone or talk to anyone. And yes, I'll answer any questions.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for that rundown of that use case. Absolutely fascinating. As a Brit here in the UK, negotiating with all the pub restrictions this year, it was very interesting to see this through the lens of spatial data. One question that popped to mind, Sarah, was with the outdoor seating data set, for example, obviously that's a variable that's attached to a POI, and that's something that's changed a lot as pubs have been able to gain new spaces or be able to use part of pavements or roads. How have you managed to keep an up-to-date POI data set there?
So that's been Mitchells and Butlers task. So they've obviously done that for their own estates. because they've really needed to know that. That's been really, really important. And then in terms of competition, we don't have the external seating, but CGA, who we use the data from, they have been really good in monitoring which pubs are open, which are closed, and then also putting a confidence flag on in terms of saying we think these might reopen, we're sure that these aren't going to reopen, and these are definitely going to open. So that's been helpful as well.
And in terms of the people who are using this insight within their business, is it typically real estate operations profiles, or are you working with like a data insights team with them?
So it's the property guys. So it's the actual surveyors that are going out and deciding, do we want to buy this new site? So it's it's a small team of the property team, and sometimes with retailers. I think that's the lovely thing about location planning. Sometimes it sits in property, sometimes it sits in marketing, sometimes it sits in finance. So we can work with all sorts of people. When I worked at Sainsbury's previously to Geolytix, I found myself working across, because I stayed in the same team but worked in about 4 different divisions over the time. So kept getting moved around.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's changes according to the company, as you say. Another question that came to mind was around turnover rents. Now, this is something that came up yesterday in Holland and Barrett's presentation. Is how much are, with everything that's happened in retail over the past year and a half, how much are you seeing turnover rents crop up and starting to be something that's considered in a model, or is it still quite an emerging trend?
Well, we were in a meeting and it was mentioned yesterday, so I think it's going to become more and more important. And we were discussing yesterday, how do we get the data that we need, and how do we use it more? So I think it's what's out there that we can use, because everyone will be very desperate to use it. It's going to be key.
Absolutely. And in terms of new data, beyond the POI data sets, you mentioned mobility data from Unicast. Are there any other data sets that perhaps you didn't use on this project that you started using in others? I don't know, social media data or anything like that that's starting to be used a lot more in retail?
I think that all the new data that's coming out is starting to be used a lot more. So the mobility data hasn't previously been used because people were worried about the accuracy, and now it's a lot better as long as you're really careful when you're using it. So that's being used more. The banking data, there's a lot of retailers using that, and we're working with people. And then social media data is harder to get the value out when you're doing sales forecasting models, but sometimes it does have a use. And definitely just any sort of ratings data from the public is great to try and understand that external lens on how well retailers are doing. Yeah,
absolutely. I think we've got time for one final question. So Edward Lowe has asked on the chat, thanks, Sarah. Really interesting presentation. The pub industry seems to be quite fragile at the moment. Do you support in running scenarios on the impact of potential further competitor closures in the next few years?
Do we support? As in, we would do that. So yeah, that's one. Yes, that's definitely one of the when we're building any network planning model with any of our clients, they often say, what would happen if one of our competitors bought another one and they merged? What would happen if we bought a competitor? What would happen if this one just disappeared overnight? So one of the things that we always do is a network plan, and then network plan scenarios where we put in batch changes of different changes in brand and closures and openings. So sometimes retailers have about 15 different scenarios that they want us to model, so we end up with lots of different modeling.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. It was great to have Geolytix be a part of the event, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks a lot.